Hey there,
Hello.
I'm Tate.
My name's Taryn. Welcome back to Plant That Sis podcast.
All right, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. How are you?
Doing just fine.
Making it?
I'm making it.
Surviving?
Yep. Now my plants, on the other hand.
Yeah, not so good. My plants really need water.
That surprises me because I feel like you usually overwater them.
Well, it was watering weekend when we lost power.
Oh,
And we have not had water that's not under a boil notice since, which we have water now, which I'll take. But my plants are thirsty. They're pissed. It's not looking good. I was all worried when we lost heat because I thought they were going to get too cold, but they were fine. But now they're like, water. You know?
Yeah, I just watered mine with the water we had here, so if they die, I'll know why.
There you go.
So, we're going to talk about our first experiment episode. So I'm sure everyone listening here, since, I'm going to assume we're all houseplant enthusiasts. We all like to garden. We like to plant things. We love it. Whatever. Just going to assume that for now. And I'm going to assume also that we will Google things online to get more info. Like, why is this plant not growing? What's the best way I could do this? What's the best way I can do that? One thing that I've always been curious about is, what is the best way or like the most efficient way to propagate cuttings? I don't know about you, Taryn, but I've always just kind of stuck them in water and let them grow roots and then do it that way. But I've heard of all these other kinds of ways. And when I look online, I see like, oh, there's the sphagnum moss way where you can make a little, almost like mini terrarium. There's perlite, you just stick it directly in soil. There's like all these, different kinds of ways to plant your propagations. And not gonna lie, I kind of didn't believe some of them. Sometimes I would see them and I'd be like, what's the point? Or like, does that really work? You know what I mean? Like we talked about before with those like 5-minute hack videos. I was like, is this one of those where it's just like some BS someone's just putting out there to put an ad on it and make money?
Well, and we all want our propagations to grow as fast as possible, usually.
Right.
Sometimes, no lie, we love a good look of pothos in water or whatever, just kind of hanging out in water because it looks good. But a lot of the times at least for me, I want a full plant out of this baby.
Yeah.
So let's get going. Let's make that happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Fast. So it's like, I'm with you. I definitely started as a water propagation person, and that's what I still use most because it's easiest to me. I've had a couple fails with the sphagnum moss situation, and I'm actually doing some perlite stuff too right now. So I'm dabbling in other things because I want to know what works best for what, obviously. But really, the goal is to get the plant from a baby to a big plant.
Exactly.
So that's why this research is helpful, so we can multiply them plants.
So for our experiment, what I did was we took cuttings from 3 of our plants. We took cuttings from a Pothos, cuttings from a Coleus plant that I have, and cuttings from a Tradiscantia plant. And we planted those cuttings in 4 different growing mediums. So I planted some of them in soil, some of them in perlite only. I left some of them in a jar of water, and then I planted some of them in some sphagnum moss with a bag over the top. And I'll go into more of the setup in a little bit. But since this is, a little experiment, I, have to have our hypothesis that we're testing here.
Hit us with the scientific process.
Okay, so this experiment's relatively simple, so the hypothesis is pretty simple.
Yes, hypothesis. I haven't been involved in a hypothesis in a long time.
Well, get ready, because this one is going to blow your mind. So I hypothesized that there will be a difference in the total growth between all of the different growth mediums. That's my hypothesis, that there's going to be a medium that's going to work better than others. Pretty simple.
You can't be wrong.
Exactly. Well, you could be wrong, but
your chances are minimal.
Maybe. That's what we're going to find out. I don't know.
Okay, that's my bet I'm placing. I'll put it that way.
Okay, that's your prediction?
I bet your hypothesis comes true.
All right, yeah, let's see. The evidence supports my hypothesis.
Okay.
In science we don't say it proves anything. We just say it supports stuff. So whatever.
Interesting. Why?
Well, this goes into the philosophy of science, and it goes way back.
We don't have to get into it.
Okay.
Okay.
Long story short, can you really prove anything?
Right. Got it.
Like being a human, can you definitively 100% prove something? Like gravity, we know it's happening, right? We know that, but you technically can't say gravity's proven to be true because...
That's probably the fastest way to sound not like a scientist, to say, well, it's actually proven. Then that automatically cues a scientist to be like, you're not a scientist.
It literally, or like when I'm grading lab assignments and they're like, my hypothesis was proven. And I'm like, I literally told y'all not to say that.
That is not correct.
But it's okay. All right. So Taryn, you had a prediction. So my prediction was that if my hypothesis is supported here, then I would predict that water would be the best growth medium for all three, given that I've done it this way before and all plants need water. So that's my pretty simple prediction and my simple hypothesis here going forward. So here is the setup now. So I'll tell you guys how I set it up. If you guys want to do something like this on your own, I recommend it. It was fun for me to do. It was fun to watch them grow in the different kinds of mediums. So basically, I had 8 cuttings from the Coleus, from my mother Coleus plant, and 12 cuttings were taken from the mother Tradiscantia and Pothos plant. So 8 Coleus cuttings and then 12 Tradiscantia cuttings and 12 Pothos cuttings. So I had those cuttings ready to go. Each growing medium was prepared before planting the cuttings. So for the water, I just used normal glass jar of water. For the soil and the perlite and the sphagnum moss, all I did was I took those, red Solo cups, those plastic cups, and I filled them up to about 1 inch to 2 inches with the, whatever medium I was using. So either soil, perlite, or sphagnum moss. And then I also got them a little damp. So I, got the moss, got it a little damp, got it wet, made sure the soil was wet, made sure the perlite had some water in it, and cut the rest of the plastic, the remaining plastic, the top of the cup, I cut that off so that later when I went to go measure the plant, I could just measure them pretty easily. Okay, so now that I had the mediums kind of all set up, next all I had to do was place the cuttings into the cups. So that was really easy for the water, because you just, put the cuttings in the jar, like I always have done, honestly. And they were good to go. So, each growing medium had 2 Coleus cuttings and 3 Pothos and Tradiscantia cuttings. So, for the soil, perlite, and sphagnum moss, the base of the cuttings were placed in the medium so that they were secure and supported. So, they wouldn't fall over.
Right.
And I did not use any, growth hormone or anything. I just didn't want, that could just be an extra variable that I just didn't want to have to worry about later,
Like you mean a rooting hormone or powder type of thing?
Yeah. What did I say? Growth hormone? Did I say growth hormone?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I meant rooting hormone. Yeah, I did not use any rooting hormone and made sure that they were secure and supported so that they wouldn't fall over or anything while they were, placed. And then, so for the sphagnum moss, the final thing I did for that was the cuttings that were placed in the sphagnum moss. Once they were secure, I put a really big plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag, over the top, and then had some holes at the top. And that kind of created a humid or more humid environment for the plant. That's kind of what it was supposed to be mimicking. So that was a part of that sphagnum moss setup, was getting that humidity aspect there too. Okay, so then after everything was planted in their all the cuttings were planted in their mediums, the cups were placed in my bathtub that receives bright indirect light throughout the day, and I watered them around once a week. So obviously the ones in water I didn't really need to worry about because they had enough water. I would just, if the water got too low, I'd fill it up. And then for the soil, perlite, and the sphagnum moss, I would water them once a week. Or, I would test them once a week. How dry are they? Are the plants looking kind of wilty? Just take a look at it. And then each week after I watered it, I would measure the growth height of the plant using calipers. I would just measure the base of the plant to the top of the plant to see, what the stem length was. And then later I realized that I really only needed the initial measurement and the final measurement because I was trying to see the total growth. And I realized I wasted all this time along measuring it when I didn't really need to do that. So hindsight is always 20/20, but that's okay. It was still fun.
You'd always rather have it and not need it rather than the other way, right?
Exactly. I let them grow for about 6 weeks. And I, watered them, took care of them, let them grow for about 6 weeks. And then I took the final measurements of each cutting. So then what I did was to figure out how much the cuttings grew in total. I subtracted the initial length from the final length to get that difference of how much it actually grew in the 6 weeks.
Like, we're over here measuring the actual plant, not measuring roots, right?
Yes, I'm measuring like the stem.
Yeah.
The stem length. Yeah, I'm actually curious about the roots. It's like my next thing I want to look at. So, so once I got the final measurements, did all the calculations, then I could run some stats, which I won't really go into, but I could see, what difference, if any, were significant and what differences were not significant. What happened? What are our results
I'm
here?
dying to know. You gotta spill.
So first off, for the perlite, both the Coleus and the Pothos cuttings actually ended up dying. So I couldn't really use that in any of the analysis because of that. So I'm just going to kind of go ahead and say maybe perlite might not be the best propagation method for those plants. I'm thinking it's because I know Coleus and I think Pothos as well likes moisture, and perlite just kind of tends to dry out a lot. If you are going to propagate those plants in perlite, you're probably going to want to water them more than once a week. I think I just, once a week just probably wasn't enough water for them. So they died, and I was like, okay, well, can't really analyze that data since they're dead. They have negative growth, so not a good sign. But I do want to say that the Tradiscantia was actually fine in the perlite. It didn't grow as high as it did in some of the other mediums, but it's still alive, and it's still growing.
Nice.
So,
of course it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Tradiscantia seems to be pretty hardy, so yeah, it didn't seem to care what medium it was in, but we'll get to that in a second. So yeah, had to kind of scratch perlite from really analyzing stuff because the plants died and then I couldn't do it. So, getting that out of the way, I guess let's talk about the plants now. So, first we're going to talk about the Pothos. In general, the Pothos was extremely slow at growing, so it took a long time for roots to form, I noticed, and I only looked at the roots in the water because, like I said, I didn't want to mess with the Pothos that were in the soil or the sphagnum moss or anything. I didn't want to mess them up. I didn't want to, kill them somehow accidentally.
Somehow.
So, yeah, exactly. So I just kind of let them be, but the roots in the water, it did take a long time for them to form roots. So I think because of that, I think, honestly, I think Pothos are just kind of slow growers anyways, right? They didn't seem to grow a whole lot in general, and I didn't find any significant differences between each medium. So I was kind of thinking that it's probably because for a Pothos to get anything, meaningful, I think we would need longer than 6 weeks to figure out, which one is the best. But I will say that the one that did grow the most, it did grow the most in water. Now, I didn't, when I ran the stats, I couldn't find that was necessarily, significant. And so I can't say that the water is the best way to do it. But it seemed like it liked the water or the sphagnum moss setup better than just the soil.
Gotcha.
And I think it's because Pothos likes that moisture. It likes the moisture. It's thirsty. I think in water, it's just there, ready to go. Sphagnum moss, a little more humid in that little setup that I had. So it seemed to like that okay. And in the soil, it grew, but not a whole lot. There really wasn't a whole lot of growth.
That was a little
just
tougher.
In general, in general, there wasn't a whole lot of growth for Pothos. So, especially compared to some of the other plants.
I think when they're bigger, then they can really get going, especially if you get them climbing and you give them optimum conditions. But let's all be honest, who gives, of all their plants, which Pothos is getting the optimum conditions? Not many, because the whole point half the time of having a Pothos is to stick in that one corner where nothing else will survive.
Right, exactly. And, think about too that they're a little cutting. I should have mentioned that earlier. The cuttings from these plants were pretty small. So I think given more time, the Pothos could have grown more and we could have gotten more data, but we just decided to end the experiment at 6 weeks. Overall, pretty slow growing plant. I think you're right, Taryn. Once it gets a little more established and grows a little more, it kind of will grow exponentially from there and you'll get more. But for the sake of this experiment, it didn't seem to really matter what the growth medium was. None was that much better than the other. The water and the sphagnum moss was a little better. than the soil, but not by much.
I feel like my life's data supports this claim that pothos
Yeah.
cuttings take a long time to root. Not a long time. There's definitely things that take much longer, but in the scope of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
they're a little slow.
And compared to the other two plants we looked at here, they're pretty slow. All right. So the next one is our Tradiscantia. So this plant was the least picky out of all of them. I mean, it grew in any of them, and any and all of them, it was doing fine. It grew in the water, grew in the perlite, grew in the sphagnum moss, and grew in the soil. So it was not picky.
We love an open-minded queen.
Yeah. She was like, okay, whatever. I'll persevere through all of these. It doesn't matter. And so what I found when I read the stats, too, was that there really wasn't a significant difference in any of the growth mediums, which, again, makes sense because it grew in all of them. It was happy in all of them. And I think Tradiscantia is just a fast grower in general, so that's not surprising. I mean, it's a plant that does grow fast just naturally. But, yeah, I noticed that the roots sprouted in the water very quickly. Like, I think the day after you gave me the cuttings for this experiment, they already had roots in the water.
Yes.
Budding.
Love that.
Yeah. So I think from now on, I'm just going to, root them in water because that seems to be the quickest way to get the roots going for the Tradiscantia. But, if you have soil laying around or if you have just want to plant it in soil, get it in the pot that you're going to put it in and get it going, it'll grow and do fine as well.
I've definitely heard tips for Tradiscantia too that you can just literally take the cutting and then shove it back in the soil. I think there's a lot of plants that can continue to grow in that way if you need them to be more full at the top. Usually all of our trailing plants over time get a little balled up at the top, and that's a way to fill it in. And that would make sense because it's such a ready grower.
Yeah, exactly. It grows quick, establishes roots pretty quick. So yeah, if you have a plant and you want to fill it out, just take the cuttings and put them back into the soil.
You don't necessarily have to do like a propagation step to put it back in.
Yeah, exactly. You really don't. I mean, I do think cuttings may need a little more water to get started. Mm-hmm. So like I think a normal Tradiscantia plant, you may not want to water once a week like I did, but I think with the cuttings, since they're, they need that extra little help. Yeah, but once it gets established, which, doesn't take too long, you can kind of go back to the normal watering schedule. All right. And last but not least, our Coleus here. I did find significant differences in each cutting depending on the medium it grew in. So the Coleus had a definite preference for one of the mediums. And that medium was... Tara, you want to guess?
I'm going to guess. I'm not looking at the thing. I'm
don't look.
Guess sphagnum moss.
Ding, 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 ding.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. It grew the most in the sphagnum moss, like, by far. Like, I have a graph here. I wish I could show you guys, but if you look at the graph, it's very obvious to tell that it grew the most in the sphagnum moss. There is a statistically significant value for this when I ran it, which just means that it's probably not due to random chance, that this is significant and really does exist. So, if you have a Coleus plant and you want to get it going big, quickly, I would recommend the sphagnum moss treatment. So all you do again for that is you get some sphagnum moss, get it damp, put the cuttings inside, and then put some kind of, clear plastic bag over it and poke some holes in it to build up that humidity within like the little chamber that it's in.
I should have done that with the Coleus you gave me because it's already dead. So if you guys listened to our holiday plant exchange episode, I believe it's episode 5, Tate gave me a Coleus cutting and I had it in water. I mean, it had some pretty established roots in water when you gave it to me. And so I left it in there for a little bit and then I eventually potted it up in soil. And I mean, I watered it. And then the next time I went to check on it, it was dead, flat, pissed, not happy, like... It was not having it. And I really don't know what the issue was. So maybe that would have been a good transition step, especially since it had the established roots, to try it in sphagnum for a little bit to kind of baby it into getting it ready for soil.
Yeah, that could have been a good idea. Because the one that I have, so I gave you one of those cuttings. I planted one too of that other Coleus.
Yeah.
And it's doing okay. It's not doing great in the soil. I'm trying to, make sure it doesn't die. But yeah, I'm having a similar experience where it's kind of not really doing too hot. So maybe the sphagnum moss is the way to go with that
That
one.
makes me feel better. I thought you were just about to say, well, I put one in, I potted one right when you did, and
No,
mine's just
it's
fine. I was just ready for you to be like, mine's doing just great.
no, mine's not doing great. It's alive, but it's just kind of stagnating, and it's kind of droopy. So, and I'm watering it. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
But I do want to say that the Coleus was, a little. It wasn't as picky as like I think the Pothos was, because it was able to grow decent in soil and water. I mean, in the water it had roots growing. It didn't grow that tall, but it's still alive, and that's still a way to propagate them. And that's why I've propagated this Coleus plant in the past. So I think moving forward for the Coleus, I'll probably do the sphagnum moss thing, because that seemed to get it going the quickest. It seemed to like that the best. The plant just how it looks good. But just want to throw out there that it did grow okay in soil and water. It didn't die. They're still alive and growing. And in the soil, they look pretty good too.
Nice.
So, but yeah, perlite, no. It did not like the perlite. I think the Coleus likes the moisture. I have to water mine kind of often. So I think the perlite was just too dry for it.
I wonder if you had done the perlite in the same fashion as the sphagnum moss as far as adding the humidity piece to it. I wonder if that would have helped it retain maybe more of the moisture.
Maybe.
Because kind of as I'm thinking about it, as you're talking about it, I feel like I've definitely seen people grow stuff in perlite without that, but I have seen also people growing stuff in perlite just like they would sphagnum moss, like propagation box style.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if you are interested in dabbling in perlite, that might be a consideration.
Yeah, and too, I think it depends heavily on the plant.
Right.
I think, Tradiscantia was fine in perlite, because I think Tradiscantia can be okay in drier conditions, whereas I think something like a Coleus, which likes moisture, maybe it was set up from the get-go not to really do that well in the perlite anyways. So it definitely depends on the plant. And that's what we tried to... I knew going in that, each plant wasn't going to be the same. That's why we tried to look at 3 different ones, because, of course, depending on what the plant prefers and what it is accustomed to will determine how it reacts to these growing mediums. So overall, the easiest cutting to grow out of all of these was the Tradiscantia. It was the quickest to grow. It was the least picky. Sprouted roots really quickly, and just grew really fast in general. So if you have a Tradiscantia, I definitely recommend getting some cuttings off that and starting a new plant, because they're super easy to propagate. The slowest one was obviously the Pothos. Seems like the Pothos likes more it seems like the Pothos needs more time in general for cuttings to really take root and then get ready to grow again.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually noticed this too, like with when I tried to propagate Pothos before, that it kind of takes a lot of time for it to really get going. Not like a whole lot. I mean, I would say more than average.
Yeah, a little up there for at least how you would imagine a pothos would be put to root,
Yeah.
They're so easy and ubiquitous in every plant, everything, so you just would think that it would be a quicker grower since it's everywhere.
And I do notice, too, with Pothos, like, how it sprouts roots is that it sprouts, like, one big or a couple big roots that then little roots will sprout out of later, whereas, like, a Tradiscantia, a bunch of little roots kind of sprout out of the stem where you cut it. So, I think that, again, just depends on the plant. Most of all, I was kind of surprised at how, all of them kind of did okay in the soil. None of them died in the soil without any roots. Like, I mean, I just planted the bare plant in the soil, and all of them are alive in the soil. I was kind of surprised at that. I thought you're supposed to, plant them in water first and then plant them in soil.
I think if you want to go straight into soil, obviously that's skipping a step, but you have to keep it really moist. You have to keep it really wet so that you're still kind of babying that cutting. And I guess for me, I have fungus gnat issues. So the idea of any wet soil anywhere near any of my other plants sounds like a bad idea, but it definitely saves you a step if you don't have that issue.
Right, exactly. And I was just about to say, like, I think, at least for me moving forward, I'll probably stick with the water propagation for the most part, because I do think that getting those roots established in water and then moving it to soil is good. It's just always a good idea. I don't think it could hurt anything to have, more roots. But at the same time, that's just kind of my preference. after this, I'm kind of more convinced that you don't even like need to do that. You could probably, for a lot of plants, you could, like you said, if you just water them a little bit more frequently than you normally would with the cutting, if you just plant it directly in soil, I think it could grow. And I probably won't be using perlite. Not like that. Probably won't be doing that for a while, so.
I will say 2 little tidbits that might just add data to the results.
Yeah.
One, I am using perlite right now because I've had sphagnum moss issues. Like the first round, I did one giant prop box, bought a whole bunch of plants, cut them all up to make this giant prop box, and then didn't do a good job of making sure it had enough air, I guess. And so it molded. So I had to throw literally everything away. And then the second time I tried, everything dried up. So anyways, I'm having issues with that. And so I wanted to try perlite. So right now I have some Hoya cuttings, just plain like Hoya pubicalyx or whatever, the basic Hoya. It's actually the one Grammy gave me that I've had forever that I had to salvage. I took all those cuttings and instead of trying to root them in water, I put a couple of them in water, but I put the rest of them in perlite just because of almost the shape of the cuttings I took. Like they didn't have a long stem piece. I cut between all the nodes and I'm trying them in perlite. So we'll see how that goes. It seems like they're rooting. Like when I try to check on them, again, you try to be real careful, especially at the beginning. It's only been a couple weeks. So we'll see how that goes. And I can tell you how I really feel about perlite. And then a while back, I bought it's like a Dracaena, like the dragon tree kind where it grows into a tree and has a bush at the top.
Mm-hmm.
Dragon tree, I think people call it sometimes. One of those. I bought, it was a big one and it had a bunch of stems with a bunch of like tufts poking out of it. And so I wanted to propagate all of those and see what was best. And so I chopped them all up, and basically only 2 of them I tried to root in water because I watched a bunch of videos that said you didn't need to do that. And so I stuck 2 of them in water, honestly, because I thought they would be cute in these certain specific bottles in this one place. I was like, oh, that'll be cute. I'm going to do that. And then I put the rest of them in soil. Every single one that I put in soil died.
Wow.
And the 2 that I rooted first and then put in soil are thriving and very happy.
Yeah.
So like we've said a million times, obviously this type of experiment depends on the plant 100%.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun to experiment and a little hard. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket sometimes, because I think like 5 or 6 that I put straight into soil and only put 2 in water. And now look where I am. I only have 2 left from that and then a bunch of dead ones, which really I obviously took a risk. So it's not really a problem. But
now you know.
I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting. And yes, now I know for that specific type of plant. Right now I have I think it's called a cordyline. I don't really know exactly what kind of plant it is, but it's similar. It looks similar. The way it grows, the leaves are different, but it looks similar as far as the trunk goes. It's that real sectioned off looking. And so I went ahead and chopped all of those off, and I put them all in water this time.
Nice.
And of the 3, 2 of them have roots.
Oh, okay. That's good.
I'm just applying my research. I guess that's what
it's all about.
Houseplant thing is about.
Yeah. Trying to figure out what works, what doesn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are just my little experiences when I'm thinking of comparing. And I have a couple others that right after you started the project, Tate, or the experiment, I kind of did a similar thing. I put some in sphagnum and some in just water just to see which will do better.
Yeah.
And so I'll have to report back.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know.
I don't know.
And let us know. And I was going to say, too, the whole thing about houseplants, like you've said, Taryn, is to just kind of experiment and see what works best for what plant you have. And you don't have to form a hypothesis and do stats or anything on that, right? I just did it for fun because I'm a nerd and I like doing that. But you can just eyeball it. I mean, if you notice one plant is doing better than the other, then boom, there you go. You learned something. And so I definitely recommend, kind of experimenting like this. You don't have to set up a whole experiment, but like Taryn said, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And it's just kind of fun, in my opinion.
I definitely feel inspired from this. I think the next thing I want to do in regards to all this propagation stuff, I mean, I propagate weekly because I literally physically cannot stop myself. My poor plants, I think, are probably like, leave me alone, because I just continue to chop. But I think what I want to maybe try to do is have version of this. So like the next plant that I take cuttings from, I just want to have like a standing like sphagnum, perlite, water, soil little area, and then just whatever plant I feel like doing at the time, test them out, and then just take notes so that I know over time, like, okay, these do best here, these do best here, because it sounds overwhelming to try to do all at once, but I propagate all the time anyway. So if I could just set up a little place and have like a little system, then I'll be able to do that same thing and figure out what works best for me. Yes, a propagation station.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, is figuring out what works best for what plants you have. And, it'd be super interesting to try this on other plants. And so I recommend anybody listening, if you want to do a little experiment of your own like this, share with us. Tell us what plants you used or what mediums you use. We'd love to hear it. If you have any ideas for things that you want us to test out, please let us know. I would love to hear from anybody.
Tate will make you a graph like nobody's
I'll make
business.
You a graph. Yeah, I wish I could. Maybe we'll have to post the graphs on the Instagram or something, because I did make some graphs for this. I mean, not like making graphs is hard.
You did
They're
it.
there.
Yeah.
And I was also going to say, if there is if there's something you've read online that seems to work, or like something you're skeptical about, let us know, because that could be something we experiment on.
Ooh, yeah. Let us debunk those hacks.
Yes, I would love to do that. That sounds so fun. So this probably is not going to be our only experiment episode, but, we would love to hear feedback on what you guys think about it. Was it interesting? Was it not interesting? And any thoughts about the experiment? We'd love to hear from you guys. So you can catch us on Instagram at PlantThatSis, and same thing on Twitter and on YouTube, the same handle at PlantThatSis. And then you can also check out our website at plantthatsis.com.
If you really want to be pen pals, you can also email us at, or not at, I guess, plantthatsis@gmail.com is our email. So if you want a little more one-on-one, we're there for you.
Or you have, maybe you have an idea for something that's a little, maybe more writing than like a comment or a tweet, Feel free to send us an email. We check it out. We'd be reading those emails.
Yeah. For our next episode, you guys are going to be so excited after hearing all the great results we just got from this episode. It is time for our plant of the month, believe it or not. And we are going to be celebrating Tradiscantia. Considering the aggressive grower she is, we are going to take some time to really put her on a pedestal.
Yeah, put her in the spotlight.
So join us as we talk all about the wandering jewel, as we like to call it. Hope you guys are hanging in there and surviving. We are so close to spring. We're getting to that warmer weather. Hang in there. It's almost time for your plants to thrive. And we all know when our plants are thriving, it helps us thrive a little bit more. Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much for listening, and catch you next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.